Hello there, friends. Today we're going to take a look at this Hyundai Super LT-6 from 1991. This is a snappy-ish 16 megahertz 386 SX, and it originally had a 40 megabyte drive, which unfortunately it doesn't seem to want to read. This was made by Hyundai Electronics, which still exists, and yes, it is the same Hyundai as those nice car people who I used to have a car from and now I have a computer from as well. This computer is actually very nostalgic for me. My very first computer was a 286 in this same form factor. It was a Toshiba, and it was black and white with kind of black text on a white background. Very hard to read, very dim, but it was my first computer that I bought when I was in middle school from a flea market. And I learned how to program in BASIC on that thing, in QBasic. I spent tons of time on that thing, and it really kicked off my love of computers today. So, there is pretty much zero information about this thing online, except for its predecessor, which was the much more popular Super LT3, which had a smaller display and a 286. But yeah, we're going to take a look at this thing and all of its little interesting bits. We're going to try to see if we can figure out why it won't boot off of the hard drive, and we'll take it apart and see what's going on inside. I originally also thought that it won't boot from the floppy disk, and the disk drive was broken, because when you go to put a disk in, it only goes in about half the way. But thankfully, Eric from NTI Compass pointed out in my previous video that had this computer in it, the disk drive is just upside down. So it actually works just fine. Well, at least it pulls in the disk just fine. I wasn't able to get it to boot off of disk. I tried this DOS 6.22 disk, but it didn't seem to want to boot from there. But we'll give that another try real quick, and if it doesn't want to boot from DOS, maybe it'll boot from Slackware Linux 1.1.2, which I've gotten this thing to boot all sorts of computers, so maybe we'll have some luck with that. But let's power this thing on and see what we can find. All right, so it's doing the memory test and then invalid configuration information. Run setup program. Okay, so if we press F2 to run the setup utility, we're into our nice ancient Phoenix setup utility, version 1.0. That is quite old, but it seems to try to automatically correct problems. But it did this before, and maybe it's something with the date, but it detects the floppy, and it detected the Type 17 drive, 40 megabytes, that's what's supposed to be in there. It detects the memory, 640K base memory, 1024K extended memory, the video card it's detected. Let's try system info. Whoa, that is not readable. But it says it's a 386SX with no coprocessor. Wow, that is not meant for a screen like this. Yeah, it says it's a 80386 or 386SX with no coprocessor installed, BIOS version 1.01, and yeah, if I press escape, I can do load default, which doesn't change anything, so it should work. And then Let's save values, exit setup, and reboot. And it's still not going to see that hard drive. Yep, invalid configuration information. Run setup program, and then if I do F1 to continue, we're going to get a non-system disk error. So, we'll try DOS 622 in the drive upside down. And the light comes on and I hear activity. Try to press a key to continue. No luck. All right, let's try with our Slackware disk. Insert it upside down again. And we've got the green light. I hear some sound. We'll press a key. No such luck. All right, well, I think it's time to tear this thing apart and make sure everything's connected inside. See if there's anything obviously broken or blown up on the motherboard. And see if maybe we can get this thing to boot. Okay, before we tear this thing apart, let's take a look around the outside. So this is a huge, heavy computer. And unfortunately, it didn't survive the best. It's got a lot of cracks around the outside. Where this interesting little handle goes. It's cracked around the outside there. Only one out of the two hinges still latches shut. On the right hand side, we have our upside down floppy drive. We've got our power switch. We have a PS2 port, and we have what I think, it says numpad. So I guess they had a number pad accessory, or that was maybe common back then. I don't really remember ever seeing that, but interesting. And then on the back, we have our interesting power port here that actually the power connector screws on. I've never seen that before. We have a port for an external floppy disk drive, and I think I have a disk drive that'll fit that. We have our printer parallel port. We've got our standard serial port, video, an expansion port, and then a blanked off cover where the modem would go. On the left hand side of this beast, we've got just our two contrast knobs, and I believe just a fan grate here. And then under this panel here is where the battery goes. And this is actually kind of annoying to take off. If I use my little spudger here, it's much easier. And we've got a rather poor condition nickel cadmium battery in here. This is generally connected with this Molex connector, but in this case it's not connected, and I don't blame them, because if you look on the edge here, it is awfully crusty. So we'll just leave that disconnected. Okay, so side effect of no information online is that I couldn't find anything about how to take this apart. So I'm going off of 25-year-old memory of when I had a similar computer from Toshiba that had almost this exact same form factor. So I'm just going to try to take it apart. And obviously I'm not the first person to take this apart. Case in point, there are 4 Phillips head screws in here, and I've taken 2 of them out already, and they don't match. They are 2 completely different screws. One of them is like a regular case screw. The other one looks like a metal screw or something. So I don't know if I'm even going to put that back in there when I put this back together. But those are not the screws that are supposed to be in there. At least one of them isn't. But anyway, let's keep going. Try to get this apart. Alright, and then 3 more screws here to hold the front of the keyboard cover down. And they're pretty well frozen in place. We'll need the big guns. I think we'll need the bench wrench so we can get some leverage on these. All right. And look at that. One of these 2 out of the 3 clips are broken off. I don't know if we can do anything about that. Okay, now if I remember correctly from my old Toshiba, this is supposed to kind of lift off just like a car. There's probably some more screws back here. Yeah, 2 more Phillips head screws. So unfortunately, when I was taking this thing apart and I was doing these 2 screws in the back here, they just came apart as if they were made out of paper. So they completely stripped out. They are completely frozen, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't get them out. So we have to move into the big guns here. And I did try to drill them out a little bit. I got this one, the head off, but this one is being a little bit more stubborn. So we're going to try something I've never used before, and that's one of these stripped screw back out kits, which is basically little drill bits that go into the screw, and then another drill bit that is actually a reverse thread, so that as you screw into the hole you drill with this one, it turns the screw the other way and tries to pull it out. So I've never used this before, but we're going to give it a try and see if we can't save the back of this computer. Okay, so we finally got the thing apart with minimal damage to these holes here. And really, the back out thing did not work as well as I had hoped. So these top bits did not pull the screw back out, but I was able to just finish eating away the pretty flimsy head of the screw with the drill bits down here. Okay, let's take this thing the rest of the way apart. Now we can hopefully just lift off the screen. And we have just a couple of cables to unplug. Okay, this is interesting. These 2 cables look extremely similar, and I don't want to plug them in the wrong way, so I'm going to make a small modification. There we go. Small red line to make sure that I plug the right cables back together. I think I can live with that little mod. And now I'm definitely sure that I'm not the first person in here. We have a pretty nice little duct tape job right there. All right, so here's our nice keyboard made in Taiwan. Looks like in October 1990. And here we have our 386 processor, which is way smaller than I remember. And then we have the spot for the Math coprocessor, and then of course our RAM slots on the board here. And I guess like a 2-part ROM, or that's the BIOS, I guess. Interesting. And we've got Hyundai, and it's a revision B motherboard. So I guess that's good, right? All right, let's turn our attention to the hard drive and floppy disk pack, for lack of a better term. This big old bracket with both of these installed. I'm going to assume that the hard drive is dead because it didn't make any noise, even though it was plugged in and has power. And it does look like the floppy disk is supposed to be in upside down, because of the orientation of the cable and how that connects to the motherboard. So the hard drive is screwed in. It's a full-size IDE drive, so might as well take that out. And then the floppy drive is not screwed in, and actually is just kind of floating there. Seems like maybe they have double-sided tape holding it in, since it had to go in upside down. Probably this isn't the original floppy drive that was in here. But let's take this hard drive out. And we have here a Connor 3000. I'm just going to take a quick picture of the specs on this thing. Might need that later. So what are we going to do with this thing? I don't think I have another full-size IDE drive. I really thought this was going to be a laptop-size drive. I do have another one of these IDE to SATA adapters, which maybe would fit in here. I guess probably, yeah, it's about the same size, but I don't have a free cheap SSD lying around. So I'm not sure what we're going to do. Probably our first thing is to just get this computer to boot off of a disk. And then once we have that, we can figure out the hard drive situation. All right, let's see if we can put this together enough to just test out if it can boot. Well, I think I found a big problem here on the power supply board here. And let's see if you can spot it too. I'll give you a hint. It's this completely exploded transistor, I guess, right there. This is right next to where the power switch plugs into the board. And this transistor looks like it has a bullet hole in it. And it's all charred down there, and it charred even onto the connector here. And then on the other side of the board, we can see it charred straight through. And the middle leg of this transistor isn't even connected anymore. I don't even think it exists anymore. So I don't know what happened here. This definitely happened before I got it, because I definitely would have smelled this. So whoever had this before me must have smelled something terrible and then put it up on eBay, I guess. But it's kind of surprising that it still, booted as far as it did and still let me get into BIOS and everything. So I don't know, but I'm not going to try to continue to work on the computer with this blown transistor here. And I don't have one to try to repair this board, so I guess I'll try to order one and then dust off my soldering equipment. But until then, I think we're going to have to end this video here on this rather disappointing note. But we will revisit this cool 386 again, and you'll get to see me hopefully not fail at soldering, because I do really love this computer. As I mentioned, it's a lot like my very first computer that I bought at a flea market when I was in middle school that taught me how to program. So if I can get this computer saved and put QBasic on it again and write a missile command clone or a text adventure, that would be a big success. So I'm not going to give up on this yet. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Thanks very much for watching.